You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
Good evening, Dolphin fans, and welcome to episode 16 of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow the show on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, or wherever you get your podcasts. I am sorry for taking a brief one-week hiatus, but I am back, and I apologize for not getting the podcast out. It'd been a long week for me, and traveling to both sides of the family for Mother's Day kind of put a damper on my schedule for the weekend, and I wasn't able to record a podcast. But truthfully, it was a nice break, a nice chance to kind of step back after the draft and just kind of focus on having fun with the family and just not having to worry about anything Dolphins related for a couple days. But of course, it's the NFL. The NFL never stops, and neither do the Dolphins. And we've got a lot to cover in this week's show. We're going to cover the news of the past, 2 weeks. We're going to bring back our X's and O's segment on rookie safety Javon Holland. We're also going to recap the draft fits of how the rookies fit into the roster, what their roles will be, and what I think about the roster as a whole. And I also did something kind of different over the past week with regard to the receiver position, and we'll finish the show off with a quick segment about the wide receivers and how we might build a wide receiving core for the Miami Dolphins. Now, obviously, the news of the past, 2 weeks has been that veteran safety Bobby McCain was released. Bobby was one of my favorite players, kind of, an overachiever, came from the 5th round in 2015, worked his way up from a backup as a rookie to being one of the better slot corners in the game, to shifting to free safety once Brian Flores came on board, and really had a nice season in 2020. But I think that having Jevon Holland available and them making that selection and just creating as much cap flexibility as they want for future years gave them the impetus to go ahead and release Bobby McCain just because they knew that he was never going to be around for the final 2 years on his contract. Had the chance to speak briefly to Bobby while he was on injured reserve in 2019 when I went down for the game against the Bengals. Just overall, a really nice guy, a really fun story, one of the better players we had on the Dolphins in 2020, and I'm sure we'll feel a sting from his loss. Obviously, I wish Bobby nothing but the best and hope he lands on a new roster soon, because I know he'll be able to contribute right away and should be a starter in this league. The other news of the week was that Miami brought in 2 players and signed one of them. They brought in former Colts safety Malik Hooker on a visit. He has left and has not signed with the team, but they did bring in New England Patriots cornerback Jason Mccourty, who did sign a 1-year deal with the Dolphins. And he is on board and will bolster some depth in the secondary. Now, the X's and O's segment with Jevon Holland kind of spiders into all of this, because initially, when Miami selected Jevon Holland with the 36th pick a couple weeks ago on Friday night, I loved the player. I'd really liked his film. I think I had him as my number 3 free safety. Admittedly, I probably dinged him a little too much for opting out of 2020 and just hadn't seen as much film on him as I had some of the other players available, namely Richie Grant and Trayvon Moehrig. Those are the 2 I had him behind. And just have watched a ton of Jevon Holland's games since they drafted him. And initially the fit didn't make much sense because Bobby McCain was there. But now that Bobby McCain isn't there, there's certainly a pathway to Jevon Holland being a day 1 starter on the Dolphins defense. Now, as far as Jason Mccourty goes, I've seen a couple people suggest that maybe he competes at safety and converts from corner to safety just like his twin brother Devin, who is currently the free safety for the Patriots. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case. Maybe they wanted someone who's a veteran who understands the system to come in and be able to do that. And maybe that's some of the impetus behind Jason McCourty. But I think what Jason McCourty gives you ultimately is one really good depth piece to play on the perimeter. So if something were to happen to Xavier Howard or Byron Jones, you may not have to rely on Noah Igbenogany, especially if they're going to start trying to train Noah Igbenogany in the slot. So Jason McCourty comes in as some valuable depth there. And what I really wanted to focus on is sort of a misconception about what that single high safety role is and what Bobby McCain played for the Dolphins the past couple of years. And I wanted to start off with a quote from Brian Flores. This was from his post-draft press conference on Friday night after they had drafted Jevon Holland. And the quote reads, and this is from Travis Wingfield's piece on MiamiDolphins.com, his deep dive into Javon Holland. And Brian Flores said, "I really enjoyed watching Javon play for a lot of reasons. The way he tackles, the way he defeats blocks, a lot of ball production, his versatility. He played some nickel, played some deep safety. There are a lot of things to like. I think he's got leadership qualities. I think he's got the ability to communicate and really quarterback a defense because he's smart." Now, the last sentence is really what I want to pay attention to because we know Brian Flores preaches, smart, tough, physical football teams. That's his MO. And I think Javon Holland exemplifies that. And I think Brian Flores sometimes tells us a little more than we may think. We all kind of think that coaches and general managers always speak to us in coach speak or GM speak, and they say a lot without telling us anything. I think that quote is kind of a giveaway on what Javon Holland could be for the Dolphins. And to me, that almost sounds like he's telling us, okay, he's going to replace Bobby McCain at free safety. And to me, this feels almost kind of like a do-over of the Minkah Fitzpatrick pick. I know that was before Brian Flores, but I feel like having the versatility that Holland has allows him to play that free safety role. And, I would challenge Dolphins fans to go back and look at how Brian Flores used Devin McCourty when he was the de facto defensive coordinator for the Patriots in 2018. Yes, the majority of the snaps are of Devin McCourty playing a single high, middle of the field free safety, just like Bobby McCain did. But just like Bobby McCain, they did bring Devin McCourty down into the box and had him as an overhang edge player sometimes in that cover zero blitz package that we saw the Patriots have a ton of success with. We saw the Dolphins have a lot of success with it last year. They also used Devin McCourty as a cloud coverage safety, meaning that he was basically a deep bracket player on a receiver. I would cite the AFC Championship game that year when they basically had him over the top of Tyreek Hill at all times. The Patriots decided to double Tyreek Hill. A lot of times they also doubled Travis Kelce and then just basically dared the Chiefs, if you can beat the other 7 players with all you've got left, we'll tip your hat to you. Now, the Patriots cooked up a nasty pass rush game plan and for a half dominated Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Ultimately, the game got a lot closer, but the Patriots went on to win that game, went on to win the Super Bowl. Brian Flores hired as the Dolphins coach the next day. We know the story. They also used Devin McCourty as sort of a tight end coverage specialist, much like the Dolphins have used Eric Rowe over the past season and a half. So I think with Javon Holland, you're going to have opportunities to see him do all of those things. He's going to be an assignment-based player. He can play low in the nickel, in the slot, or as a rat or robber when you play some of those cover one looks. Oregon did a lot of creative things where they would have him line up in the slot pre-snap, and then right at the snap they would have him shift and become a split safety in cover 2 or cover 4. They would even have him rotate and become a single high safety sometimes, almost like the old Tampa 2 dropper. Just very interesting how Oregon deployed Jevon Holland, and I think that has to appeal to Josh Boyer and Brian Flores because they can deploy him in the same way. He can do the split safety stuff. He can play as a cloud. He can play single high. You can put him down in the box like they tried to do with Minkah Fitzpatrick and have him as an overhang defender and play the run that way. Patrick Chung did that for years for the Patriots. And I think now that the Dolphins finally have that player, you can use him as a week-to-week matchup piece. Now, I think the key here is how quickly can he pick up the defense and get reacclimated after taking a year off. I guess that's something we'll see, and I know the Dolphins have their rookie mini camp this weekend, and that'll be the start of that journey for Jevon Holland. With him in the fold, I think it's safe to wonder who is the backup there. Now, if you remember if you watched the games from last year, when Bobby McCain got hurt in Week 4 against Seattle, they brought on Jamal Perry to replace him as that single high safety. Jamal Perry did okay in that game. Bobby McCain fortunately came back and played very well thereafter. Then in the Kansas City game, Bobby McCain got dinged up a couple different times. Jamal Perry was out that week because of the COVID list, and they had to play Clayton Fedulum there. Fedulum was too slow getting over on the end around that Tyreek Hill scored, and then he bit hard on the play fake by Patrick Mahomes when they had Tyreek Hill perfectly bracketed on the touchdown pass. They had Xavier Howard over the top to the outside to prepare for the post corner route. Clayton Fedulum sank up too far on the run fake and got beat over the top for a touchdown. So clearly you want to have someone dependable that can come in and play that role because you're covering an awful lot of ground in a lot of those circumstances. And I do wonder if that's why Miami were so keen on bringing in Malik Hooker, because he's been very, very good when he's been on the field and been healthy. And if I were Malik Hooker, I would want a chance to be the starter. And I kind of wonder if that's why he hasn't signed with Miami to this point, is because he knows that Javon Holland is the guy that they've got targeted to be that deep safety type of player. But the main point of the X's and O's segment is, I'll let fans determine their own conclusion. I could put a piece together about it. But go back and watch how the Patriots deployed Devin McCourty. Watch some of how Oregon deployed Jevon Holland, and tell me that those two aren't very similar. They're built fairly similar. They move pretty similar. I think Devin McCourty had a faster 40 time and such than Jevon Holland did, but Javon Holland is a better tackler in space, in my opinion, better run defender. So you're taking some of each player and basically spitting out Javon Holland. When you look at Bobby McCain, Devin McCourty, and even Minkah Fitzpatrick thrown in, I think Holland is sort of the combination of those three and should fit pretty well into the defense. So just wanted to put that out there because I've seen a lot of people wondering what the Dolphins were going to do now that Bobby McCain is no longer with the team. Now, quick word from our sponsor at manscaped.com. I know it's mowing season. I've been out doing a lot of yard work lately. We've had some crazy rain here in Indiana, so I've had to cut the grass multiple times a week, keeping everything looking nice. And if you need to keep things looking nice for your lady, you want to check out manscaped.com. Enter the promo code DolphinsTalk. That's all one word, DolphinsTalk. And you can get up to 20% off of your order from manscaped.com, along with free shipping. So that's manscaped.com. Enter the promo code DolphinsTalk to get up to 20% off your order with free shipping. Thank you to our friends at manscaped.com. Now, real quickly, I wanted to kind of run back through my brief notes about how the rookies fit into the Dolphins roster. Just because reviewing the draft and all that is the in vogue thing to do. I'm not going to grade it right now. I think you need to see how all these pieces fit before you worry about that. But what I do appreciate is I think of the first 5 picks, 3 of these guys have the potential to be day one starters for the Dolphins. And those 3 being Jalen Waddle, Jevon Holland, and Liam Eichenberg. I think the other 2, Jalen Phillips and Hunter Long, have the potential to be very heavy contributors for the Dolphins, even though they may not start, and I'm using air quotes there, they may not start a game, but I think they're going to play nearly or as many snaps as a starter would normally play throughout the course of the season. And then I think they took a good chance on 2 guys that can be developmental players that they may not necessarily use this year, but you can save them for down the road, in Larnell Coleman and Jared Dokes. So quickly running through my fits for all of the rookies again. Jalen Waddle, I think day one he comes in as your starting slot receiver. You can also kind of interchange him with Will Fuller as the Z. And his biggest asset's going to be being able to stretch the field vertically and horizontally, somewhere between a cross of Santana Moss and Tyreek Hill. And you can use him in a variety of different ways. You can get him the ball behind the line of scrimmage and let him turn it into a punt return play. You can throw it deep to him. You can throw him short routes and let him gain yards after the catch. Just a home run swing right there by Chris Greer and Brian Flores, getting a weapon for Tua. I also think that he can become the starting kick and punt returner. And when you look at the price tag for what Jakeem Grant is costing, he's probably on the hot seat. He is on notice at this point, in my opinion. And Jalen Waddle is a darn good returner as well. As for Jalen Phillips, I think eventually he's going to become a starter. Maybe sooner rather than later. Just based on some of the intelligence I've been able to put together, I have a pretty good feeling that Zach Sealer is going to get a decent amount of snaps as a defensive end in four-man fronts. But I think Jalen Phillips ultimately is going to be used how they wanted to deploy Shaq Lawson. And I think that's as a wide defender playing 5, 6, wide 5, 9 techniques. You don't want to put Jalen Phillips inside over a guard a whole lot, doing some of those three-man fronts or condensed fronts. That's just not his game. You want to keep him on the edge, let him rush the passer, and where he makes his money is going to be on third downs. I'd go back and look at, and I hate to make a comparison, but look at how the 49ers used Aldon Smith when they first drafted him. I think he had something like 14 sacks as a rookie, and he only played on third downs. I'm not saying Jalen Phillips is going to get 14 sacks, but now that you have someone that you can put opposite Emmanuel Ogbah on third downs, you have the potential to get pressure on the quarterback using 3, 4, maybe 5 players, and you can sit the rest into coverage, which was something that hurt the Dolphins against guys like Josh Allen, who we've got to see twice a year. It hurt them last year against Russell Wilson, maybe a little bit lesser extent Patrick Holmes. Miami played him pretty well for the most part. But you get the idea. Now they have the opportunity to get after the passer with four-man lines. I think Adam Butler's presence will help in the interior as well. So with Phillips, I think he's a heavy contributor from day one on third downs, and I think you kind of grow his role until he eventually becomes a starter. Jevon Holland we talked about. I think he's the starting free safety and a matchup piece. Liam Eichenberg. It's been reported by several people, including Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald, that they've basically told him you're going to shift to the right side initially. Now, Chris Kaufman, who you guys know as @CKParrot on Twitter, fantastic Dolphins follow. For those of you who don't already follow him, go ahead and follow Chris. Had a great thread about the resume that Liam Eichenberg put together at Notre Dame. He did not allow a sack against Azeez Ojulari. He did not allow a sack against Josh Uche, Kwity Paye, and Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan. Faced Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver of Pittsburgh. Didn't allow a sack. Played Alabama in the playoffs. Didn't allow a sack. Clemson a couple times in the playoffs. Didn't allow a sack. Taller guy, a little over 6'6". Not as athletic as Laramie Tunsil. Not as big and powerful as Jake Long. I would kind of compare him almost to a more technically sound version of Brandon Albert. He's not the dominant run blocker that Jake Long was, but he's not a get-in-your-way run blocker the way Laramie Tunsil was. Liam Eichenberg can move some people, and I think as long as he keeps his technique right, he's a very technically sound pass blocker. Doesn't have the super long arms that Jake Long and Laramie Tunsil, who was only 6'5", still had ridiculously long arms. He doesn't have those vines, but he's got a good punch. He times it very well. He's patient. His tape at Notre Dame, and this was pointed out to me by our own Dante Colinelli here at Dolphins Talk, look at how well he passes off twist games, rush games, stunts. It's teaching tape. This is exactly how you want it to look. He's very smart, very experienced, has a really good feel for when to disengage and re-engage a looper, something that the Dolphins were not so great at last year. Watch the Denver game, for example, and you see Austin Jackson just kind of look like he's in a world of hurt all day against Bradley Chubb. So I think what Liam Eichenberg's addition does is it really kind of helps you improve 3 spots on the line. Number one, he's going to play right tackle, and you want that steady, consistent force of pass blocking behind Tua's blind side, which is the right tackle, given that Tua's a lefty. It allows you to kick Robert Hunt into right guard, where a lot of people think he's better suited. If you got a chance to watch the Finside the NFL draft live stream, we had former Miami Dolphin legend Richmond Webb on, and I asked Richmond about that, and Richmond gave me a really good answer about how he felt that, Robert Hunt's footwork, his power, his ability in the run game all made him better suited to play inside. So if you can, go back and watch that on Reason's YouTube channel, Finside the NFL, and check out my answer with Richmond Webb. I think we got into that shortly after the Dolphins had selected Jalen Phillips. So if you want to go through and look for the timestamp, it's somewhere after Jalen Phillips was picked, I believe. But if you move Robert Hunt to right guard, it also allows you to move Solomon Kinley to left guard. Thereby, I think you improve both of your guard spots and you get a more consistent pass blocking presence at right tackle. So that pick kind of has a mushroom effect there. You're getting better at a number of spots as long as Liam Eichenberg pans out, and I think he will. Hunter Long was really kind of the one pick that I kind of thought, okay, that doesn't make much sense. Good player in a vacuum. I had him as my number 4 tight end, and you were really kind of splitting hairs between Tommy Tremble and Hunter Long. I think Hunter Long eventually is going to take Durham Smythe's spot. He's a bigger tight end, has some blocking ability. There were some games where he was really good, some games where he wasn't so good. Clemson was one of the better ones. But he's able to make contested catches in traffic. He's got a pretty savvy feel for route running and when to sit down, when to throttle down, when to, use fakes in his breaks, and gets himself open. Pretty good compliment piece to Mike Gesicki, in my opinion. And, Miami's done a lot of work in the tight end room this offseason, signing Ethan Carter, drafting Hunter Long. It sounds like Carl Tucker's going to be used as a fullback, a la James Devlin. And they also signed Jabri Blunt, the son of Mel Blunt. Just kind of a lot bubbling below the surface for a position that was pretty solidified, in my opinion, last year. But I think eventually Hunter Long is going to be that Y tight end and phase out Durham Smythe. Now, good for the Dolphins considering the amount of 12 personnel and 13 personnel they ran last year, which I think both of those figures were in the top 10 in the NFL. So, in a vacuum, really good player. The fit is a little bit murky right now, just given the amount of tight ends they have, but I'm sure that'll sort itself out. Larnell Coleman, I won't pretend to know anything about him other than he's really tall and he had the second longest wingspan of the entire draft class. To me, he kind of feels like a practice squad guy that you can develop into a swing tackle over time. So maybe if you determine that Jesse Davis's contract is too expensive in a year from now, maybe you have Larnell Coleman ready to step up and be that swing guy. Jared Dokes, the running back from Cincinnati, I've seen him play a lot. I wonder if he's a guy that you kind of stash on the roster maybe so he doesn't get poached, and you kind of feed him in later in the year or even next year, kind of like what the Patriots did with Damian Harris. Because if I was going to compare Jared Dokes to a player in the NFL, it would have been Malcolm Brown, the running back the Dolphins signed away from the Rams. I think Jared Dokes is a decent third down option. He's a really good pass blocker. He's got soft hands, good short yardage back. Don't know that he's an every down bell cow back, though. But, worth developing. The undrafted guys, we kind of went over them in the last episode. I think of them, now that we know Carl Tucker is shifting to fullback, that's something to keep an eye on because he was a pretty good blocking tight end at both North Carolina, and then he played 1 year for Alabama. So that's a project worth watching. Robert Jones was a right tackle at Middle Tennessee. He's now moved inside to guard. That could be some good depth. Jerome Johnson, the defensive tackle from Indiana, probably lost in a numbers game here in Miami when you've got Wilkins, you have Raekwon Davis, you have Adam Butler, you have Zach Sealer who can play end or tackle. but has primarily been a tackle. And you brought back John Jenkins. Benito Jones played last year. Jerome Johnson's kind of weird. He's really leggy, really lanky, really tall. He gets beat a lot off the snap. He gets driven back or washed out of the play. But he has a weird secondary motor where he's able to kind of use his long arms and get himself back into a play. I don't know that I've ever seen a player quite like that, where he just looks like he's getting absolutely ragdolled right off the snap, and then, he does one thing and he's tackling the running back for a 3-yard gain. It's kind of incredible how his secondary motor and secondary moves work. Maybe that's worth stashing on the practice squad and trying to develop, but I just don't see a path for him to making the roster here in Miami. But I think that that is kind of the overall point. You look at the 90-man roster as things stand now, it's deep. I think Miami's probably got the deepest roster they've had, I don't know, since maybe Nick Saban in 2006 when they started to load up, since 2002 when I still wonder what that team does if Jay Fiedler never breaks his thumb in the Denver game. But other than that, this feels like the most complete team, I guess on paper, that we've had in a long time. And you look at some of the spots they're going to have competition. You look at the tight end room now. You look at how much they've added to the secondary, primarily at the slot corner position. That's deep. You look at the offensive line. You've got guys that are competing for swing jobs now, guys that were starters in the past, now competing for backup roles. You've got a deep, talented roster. And I think that depth and that competition exemplifies itself best at the wide receiver position. And I was really curious, given that Miami have 13 of them on their 90-man roster right now, and I get that you have to use some of them to play the 3 preseason games, but I was really curious about what the fan and media and scout perspective would be on players that make the roster. So I did a little bit of a project over the past week, and I reached out to 8 people who I consider experts on the Dolphins or the NFL in general. And among these, I've got people who are in the media. They get paid professionally to write about the team or other NFL teams or the NFL in general. I've got one person from an NFL team. I've got several scouts that I was able to connect with throughout the draft process. And I went in to just kind of with the premise to see who among Miami's wide receiver core stands out and what it might look like when all is said and done with training camp in the preseason. So I sent the same question to all 8 of these people. Now, let me preface this. I told them to not count Mike Gesicki as a wide receiver. I know he plays the majority of his snaps, off the line, not as a tight end. But for this exercise, I wanted to strictly look at the guys who are labeled as receivers on the roster. So Mike Gesicki is not included in here. If you're wondering why his name is not coming up, that is why I left him as a tight end. So the question I asked everybody was, if you could build a 6-man wide receiving core using players currently on the Miami Dolphins roster, who is on your wide receiving core? And these were the notes that I got back from all 8 of these experts that I was able to ask. So we had 4 players, and you can probably guess who right off the bat. 4 players were voted as being on the receiving core by all 8 of the experts. Now, 2 of them are very obvious. Will Fuller, who Miami just signed this offseason. Jalen Waddle, who they just drafted with the 6th overall pick a couple weeks ago. Devontae Parker was voted on by all 8 players. And surprisingly, Lynn Bowden got a vote from all 8 of the experts as well. So if we're building a 6-man wide receiving core, we had 8 votes apiece, 8 out of 8, for Will Fuller, Lynn Bowden, Devontae Parker, and Jalen Waddle. Personally, if you wanted my vote, which is not counted in among these 8 experts, I would have those 4 on as well. The next highest vote getter got 6, and that was Preston Williams. I was kind of surprised that he got 6, and not 8. But then when you think about it, he hasn't really stayed healthy for 2 seasons. You already have Devontae Parker, who kind of does what Preston Williams does, but does it, a little faster, a little crisper, hasn't had as many serious injuries as Preston Williams has had over the past 2 years. But I think Preston Williams would be a really nice backup to have. Because we know Devontae struggled with an ankle and a hamstring injury at various points last year. And then you don't really have a big body amongst Will Fuller, Lynn Bowden, and Jalen Waddle. So Devontae Parker would be your only big body, really, if you don't have Preston Williams. So that's sort of the top 5. Fuller, Bowden, Parker, Waddle, and Williams. And then from there, we were all over the map. We had votes for 11 different people, counting the 5 I just mentioned. The only 2 receivers that did not get a single vote were Kyle Oxley, who was a quarterback in college at UTEP, and Alan Hearns did not get a single vote. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if people just view him as a salary cap casualty or something like that, but he did not get a single vote. We had a couple players get 3 votes. Mac Hollins, who was on the roster last year, more of a special teams contributor than a receiver, got 3 votes, but we did see him make some big catches at times. He had the touchdown pass against the Cardinals, caught the, whatever we're calling it, the Fitzmagic bearded miracle in Las Vegas to set up the game-winning field goal. Caught that, and has been a really tremendous special teams player over the past season and a half. He had 3 votes. Albert Wilson, who was returning from an opt-out, also had 3 votes. We don't know what the hip injury is like and how he looked. I think he started to come back into form, towards the end of 2019. He's had a year off to basically just work on his body and get back into shape. We'll have to see how that goes. And then we had 1 vote apiece for Jakeem Grant, who's been on the team before, obviously since 2016. We had 1 vote for Malcolm Perry, who was on the team last year, and 1 vote for Kirk Merritt, who was on the practice squad and I think played 2 snaps in the Arizona game last year. So we ended up getting more of a consensus than I thought that we would get. I kind of figured maybe Fuller and Waddle would have all 8 votes just because they were recent acquisitions. I know Devontae Parker's, there's been some speculation about a trade rumor with him. So I was a little surprised he got 8 votes. And Lynn Bowden, who, was just acquired last year, having 8 votes was a bit of a surprise to me. But I think that speaks to the overall depth of the roster that Miami has. And now that you've basically put it together, you've rebuilt the line, you're able to add speed to the wide receiving core that Brian Flores talked about is going to be able to help keep the boxes less crowded for the run game. You still have Mike Gesicki. Now you have Hunter Long that can do some different things as far as you can mismatch Gesicki around the place. You can move him around to dictate coverages. Hunter Long is a very smart, savvy player who can find holes in zone. He can win contested catches. You basically have all the ingredients you want, other than maybe a true bell cow running back, to help improve this offense. And I think you're putting an impetus on Tua Tagovailoa this year to kind of show us, okay, I'm removed from the hip injury now. He's had an off season to get bigger, stronger, faster, try and improve his arm strength and velocity some. There was a great interview with his trainer that kind of circulated on Twitter a couple days ago. They've got the opportunity to improve this offense considerably. And with the additions they made on the defensive side of the ball, I feel like we're finally on the precipice of building not just a team that's going to make the playoffs, but a team that's going to be a consistent winner. Especially if Tua Tagovailoa is who I and we as all Dolphins think he could be, which is a really good quarterback in this league. And I have to say, looking back on it, I overestimated how good this team may have been after 2016 and after 2008. This feels different to me. This feels like, I guess, kind of how it felt growing up as a kid when you knew in the late 90s and early 2000s, no matter what, your defense was always going to keep you in the game with Jason Taylor, Zach Thomas, Patrick Surtain, Sam Madison. You always knew that the defense was going to keep it close and that the offense could do just enough to win, and they were consistently in the playoffs. This feels like that to a degree. I feel like Brian Flores and the coaching staff are so good that they're going to be able to keep the team in games. They won games they had no business winning in 2019. Last year, they were never really out of a game other than Buffalo in Week 17. You look at the other 4 losses, they had chances to win all those games. It really feels like this vision that Chris Grier and Brian Flores have had is now coming together. And the Dolphins are on the precipice of being able to be a consistent contender again. And I guess for the lack of success we've had really since I was a sophomore in high school, it just feels nice, and it really has made me excited for this season, more so than any I can remember, in recent vintages of the Miami Dolphins. So, kudos to Chris Grier, kudos to Brian Flores and the front office and the coaching staffs. I feel like this roster is really built up, and they're in a position to succeed not just this year, but for future years to come. And it's nice to finally have that leadership and that direction. Dolphins fans are starving for a winner. We're starving for a quarterback. It feels like we're finally there, and we just might get it. So for that, I'm truly thankful. Thank you all for listening and for reading my articles. I'm going to be working on a couple pieces here over the next few weeks. I talked about before the draft. I think one of them is going to be about Jerome Baker. I think we'll do a recap of some sorts of the rookies, although Dante Collinelli, who also writes for us here at DolphinsTalk.com, has done a great series on his draft reviews. He's got clips of all 22 film of all the rookies that I've seen him put up so far. I would highly encourage you to check out Dante's work. Again, thank you guys so much. We will be back with episode 17 next week. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the nice weather. Fins up.